Annick Peters-Custo was unable to be with us this morning. She's well, however, and I'm happy to be able to speak on her behalf and to use the notes she gave me, although all mistakes in English remain mine. So my name is Olivier Delouis, and I'm a permanent research fellow at the National Centre for Scientific Research. I'm currently based in Oxford, in the Maison Française d'Oxford, and in Campion Hall. So please mute your microphones and write down your question in the discussion and Q&A boxes. So I'm very pleased to introduce Lilyana Yordanova once again after her recent visit to Oxford. She's a research fellow at the French School of Archaeology of Athens in Greece. She holds a PhD in art history and archaeology of the Byzantine and post-Byzantine world from the École Pratique des Hautes Études in Paris. Since 2020, she's conducting in Athens a project about cross-cultural and interconfessional relations in the long 15th century, based on the analysis of Christian and Muslim architecture and its impact on urban morphology in the Central Balkans. So she recently participated in various seminars, as I just said, in Oxford, in McGill, in Princeton University, and she has just been appointed curator of Slavic objects in the new department of Byzantine and Oriental Christian art at the Musée du Louvre, where she will take up her position in spring. So the book she's presenting today, the book title is To the Glory of God, Pious Commissions and Donations in Medieval Bulgaria, 12th to 15th century. Athens, it will be published in Athens in 2023. So the practice of the donation for the soul, pro anima, in the expectation of spiritual benefits, and the practice of commissioning pious objects are two sides of the same pattern, which has structured medieval Christian society since late antiquity. And those two processes are responsible for a certain number of productions and transfers of goods, placing them at the heart of an economy of salvation. So these productions, exchanges, and circulations are, of course, the subject of various research studies, although they have been often disconnected. At least in France, historians have concentrated on acts of donation that transfer property and the expected spiritual benefit. It is a logic of gift and counter-gift, highlighted by Marcel Mauss in his famous essay on the gift, 1924. And on the other hand, the question of the commissioning of religious objects or buildings has remained in the field of art historians, focusing on production and glorification of God and prestige. So what Lilyana does in her book, she proposes a reading of the gift that is not elitist, but profoundly global, highlighting how all categories of society are integrated into the mechanism of pious donation and religious foundation. So she does that through a theory of reception and perception of the gift by the faithful. It is a social approach, which is quite interesting, including the objectivity of the donation and the subjectivity of the reception of the gift. And this method integrates the Christian value of generosity into a social mechanism that is not reserved, that is not the privilege of the elite, but which is shared with the whole community, and especially, and again, this is quite interesting, in the liturgical framework and in the sacred space. Because according to Lilyana, this liturgical sharing revives the initial gift permanently and collectively. So if you will, a single gift from an individual serves and lives through the community. And Lilyana called this the synergy between gifts, for which she uses current approaches on sensitivity towards liturgy, and especially studies on emotions. So this is a strong point of her work, dealing with religious sociology, but she is very keen on refining analysis, changing dates from time to time, reattribute some works to some donors. So, of course, what should be stressed in this social analysis is the broadening of the traditional study to the modest individuals, other than the clergy and the lay elites, in the process of donation and foundation. In particular, you deal with graffiti of craftsmen or craftswomen, or craftsmen mainly in the buildings, in the construction of the churches, graffiti that show a kind of hidden, intimate relationship of craftsmen with God. And so the result of this book, and I'm giving back the floor to you, is a three-dimensional vision of the mechanism of donation, not only according to the traditional vertical hierarchy from the donor to the beneficiary, not only according to the public manifestation of generosity for territorial and political stakes, but on a horizontal scale involving the whole of society. So the space which is concerned here is Bulgaria from the 12th century until the Ottoman time. So it is also a very long scale of time. So we'll be happy to hear more now about your book, Lilyana.
Thank you very much, Olivier, for stepping in to chair the session and for your kind introduction. I also extend my gratitude to Petros for organizing this important event and for letting me present my forthcoming publication. And of course, I would like to thank all colleagues who are with us now for your interest. Now, as Olivier already mentioned, this book is based on my doctoral dissertation, supervised by Professor Ioana Rapti at the École Pratique des Hautes Études in Paris, and defended in 2020. And actually, the book is the result of research and broader efforts of rethinking what patronage represented during the late Middle Ages. That spent about 8 years. And the particular impetus for this study was given by the positive reconsideration of the Paleologan period in recent decades, coupled with renewed scholarly interest in the topic of gift giving, as well as in the artistic production of states within Byzantium's sphere of influence. And as medieval Bulgaria constitutes an important piece of the cultural puzzle of Southeastern Europe, the time was all too right to focus on it. So the book offers the first comprehensive study of pious patronage from the 12th to the 15th century for the territory of medieval Bulgaria. And it looks into the mechanisms of this social phenomenon and evaluates its importance for the local population during a particularly dynamic period in history, which saw the succession of the Byzantine, Second Bulgarian, and Ottoman empires in the heart of the Balkan Peninsula. In order to assess pious patronage, I adopted an interdisciplinary approach, which mobilizes analytical tools from art history and archaeology, all the way to concepts about the gift in anthropology and sociology. Nevertheless, my focus remains pragmatic and gives priority to the material evidence. The corpus of the book includes monuments, manuscripts, liturgical objects, and official documents, most of which I have studied firsthand. And I would like to take the opportunity to thank the cultural and academic institutions in Bulgaria, Serbia, Greece, and the UK for their collaboration and trust in granting me access, sometimes to their most valuable holdings. Detailed documentation of the material, including translation of the Slavonic, Greek, and Armenian dedicatory texts and documents, are featured in the corpus. And the latter provides an overview of the material, updated with new interpretations and discoveries, and can thus be of interest to experts and wider audiences alike. In the remaining time, I shall briefly introduce you to the contents of the book and its main conclusions. So the first part explores how patronage defined and shaped space. On a macro level, for example, the foundation, restoration, and endowment of churches clearly shows shifting geographical preferences. For instance, during the Byzantine phase of the 11th, 12th centuries, high-ranking officials and clergymen invested mainly Macedonia and Western Thrace, while imperial monastic foundations remained near the safer Aegean coast. In contrast, when the Bulgarian Tsardom was restored in 1185, most churches were built in its stable territories north of the Balkan mountain range, while to the south, donations accompanied territorial expansions and obviously clashed with Byzantine and Serbian patronage. In the 15th century, Thrace became the main building site for mosques, while Christian patronage continued in privileged areas such as the Black Sea coast, around Sofia and Kyustendil. Other chapters in the section investigate the impact of churches and religious objects on cityscapes, the spatial organization of villages, and rural areas in between. Attention is also paid to the value of space within the framework of long-distance circulation of craftsmen and religious gifts with diplomatic function. Now, is a religious commission or donation enough to earn the patron a place in paradise? This eschatological issue is discussed in the second part of the book, dedicated to the church as a place of ritual and interaction between the human and divine spheres. The careful examination of the material shows that acquiring salvation was a far more complex and uncertain process in the late Middle Ages, which relied on the involvement of various social groups, on memory, prestige, the donation, safekeeping, and overall economic sustainability. The third and last part of the book details the activity of patrons from all social strata recorded by the material, starting with, of course, rulers and potentates, the high and low clergy, local elites, and modest contributors. Important questions are addressed here, such as what was the attitude of Ottoman rulers towards Christian patronage, or at what moment in their lives patrons made religious offerings. Furthermore, the Triodion of Bitula that you see here on the screen is a part of a group of manuscripts which challenge the very idea of pious patronage as being ostentatious, long-lasting, and intentional act. And this marginal note implores a monastic community to commemorate Ivan, the son-in-law of Emnustin, because he gave the scribe pickles and milk. It is highly doubtful that Ivan knew that this basic act of kindness earned him commemoration. The book further looks into the activity of marginal groups, such as female and foreign patrons, while it also includes painters and artisans into the discussion. So despite basic common principles, the book argues that pious patronage does not remain the same throughout space and time, but it is specific to the historical, geographical, and socioeconomic conditions it was practiced within. Furthermore, the evidence shows that on the long run, pious commissions and donations were dependent on factors such as peace and economic prosperity, regardless of the ruler who controlled the territory. political strives had either a positive or extremely negative effect. During periods of hardships, patronage was sustained mainly by the lower strata of society. This also testifies to the key role of this practice for the functioning of the local society. Lastly, the practice seems to have operated, as already mentioned by Olivier, in two intersecting modes. A horizontal one emphasizing social cohesion, cooperation, and coordination, and a vertical one emphasizing existing hierarchies and taxes, but also providing means for their renegotiation. And on a last note, I would like to say that the book aspires to encourage further the study of pious patronage and collaborations among scholars working on the late medieval period. So thank you very much for your attention.